Hi, everybody. Welcome along to episode 134 of Percussion Discussion. As usual, I'm going to ask you all to please check out our social media. You can find us on Instagram and, of course, Facebook, and our world famous YouTube channel where you can find all conversations past and present. And these will have the video to accompany them. So if you want to see us as well as hear us, then you know what to do. Please subscribe. You won't find any adverts on the channel. It's just to help grow the channel. That's all. If you'd rather listen on the go, then all of our conversations are available in podcast form. These are free to download from your usual favorite podcast provider. On to today's episode. This is a real cracker of an episode. Today it's all about Hayman Drums. Of course, very, very, very famous brand during the 70s. And to really help me along with the conversation, we have the authority on Hayman Drums, drummer and author. He wrote the Hayman book along with Bob Henrit, another former guest on the show. So Nigel Constable is going to be helping me out with all of the history. Plus, we have some heavyweight guests throughout the show. We've got Simon Kirk, of course, who played with Free and Bad Company using Hayman Drums. Simon Phillips, he needs no introduction whatsoever. And my good pal, Robb Reiner, the drummer from Canadian heavy metal band Anvil, who's a huge fan of a certain Hayman snare drum. So it gives me great pleasure to get on with the show and to welcome Nigel Constable. Nigel, thanks so much for doing this.
Great pleasure, Matty.
Well, it's good to see you again. Now, obviously, when it comes to Hayman, you are the man. You and Bob, obviously, you wrote the book. You co-wrote the book together, didn't you? The Hayman Drum Book.
We
So,
did.
um,
Yeah.
when was that, Nigel?
It was published in 2016.
Mhm.
Its gestation sort of came a couple of years earlier. Oddly enough, I was in France in the winemaking village of Chablis, which is a recommended place to visit, and we had a wet afternoon. And it had rankled with me for a long time that there was no definitive work on Hayman. And I'd thought for a while I might do something about it. And that afternoon, while it was raining, I sat down and I roughed out a structure for it. And that was pretty much the way that the structure of the book stayed. Um, Obviously, it got fleshed out a great deal from there, and a lot of things happened along the road, as it were. But the fundamental structure, I just knocked out on my iPad, and well, there it was, really.
Mm. And it's I mean, it's quite a rare beast these days to find a physical copy of it, isn't it? There's not. It's kind of officially sold out, hasn't it? I guess you see. There's an
Yeah,
odd
well,
one or two.
yeah, it has. There are no more in stock. I don't have any plans to run another physical print run. So here's a bit of a teaser for those of you. This is what you would have won, kind of thing. There you go. That's it. That's my copy. Um, but yeah, I mean the thinking now is because there remains a lot of interest in it from various parts in the world. You know what? We shipped that to over 20 countries, which
Wow.
is pleasing. There's still a lot of interest in it, and I have decided to produce an electronic version of it, which will sort of go out as a Kindle ebook. And part of the reason for doing that is because you'll know when you start sort of shipping books around, the cost of shipping gets prohibitive. A lot of people in the US example, for example, I think would have bought the book, but the shipping was actually more than the cost of the book.
I can imagine.
So it's a way of addressing that and bring it to a wider audience and people who are possibly new to Hayman.
Hmm. Well, it's quite nice though that I mean, how many copies were printed?
That's a classified number.
Oh,
Uh,
but even so, they've all gone, and it makes it. I quite like the idea that you kind of got a limited thing there, which is nice to have, isn't it? So,
Yeah, well, I saw it as being a niche market. It turned out to be a bigger niche market than I actually
hmm.
thought it was, and it was very very well received. And Bob and I had many really nice comments about it. So I'm glad we did it. It seemed to fill a gap in the market, and well, it served a purpose, and it got something off my chest as well, because I like to think we did the subject justice.
Yeah, definitely, definitely. And I have to ask, where did your love of Hayman drums start, Nigel? Was it owning one?
No, it was before that. So I started my playing career sort of across the winter of 71, 72. I did my first gig in, well, it will have been March of 1972, 52 years ago. And that gig was performed on a couple of new era drums that the school had, and a couple of Ajax cymbals, if I remember rightly, in a little trio that I put together with mates at school. I didn't put it together. I think the other guys did, two guitarists. They needed somebody who could maybe drum a bit. And I was just learning at that time, trying to get some idea. That was what it was. Well, the thing is, it was this, that you couldn't at that time, 71, 72, turn on Top of the Pops without seeing somebody with a Hayman kit.
Mm.
It was obvious to me it was the kit to have. And you also got, in those days, in Melody Maker, they ran this sort of kit list thing each week, where they picked a famous band and they said what gear they all used, and blow me, every other week, if not more, the drummer was playing Hayman. And I just thought, I've got to have one of those. I've got to have one. You saw the likes of Bill Legend in T-Rex, and Woody Woodmansey with David Bowie, and Brian Downey with Thin Lizzy, and so on and so forth. All these kind of guys, they're on Hayman. I now know that Hayman was fulfilling a definite gap in the market. I understand that fully now. I also understand fully it was a result of some brilliant promotion, and also the fact it was something different. They were different in terms of their sound and their appearance, and it was the thing of the times. It actually took me about 3 years actually to own one. I bought a second-hand George Hayman um, uh, Big Sound, so the four drum version in gold ingot, a la Simon Kirk's kit,
Indeed,
uh,
yeah.
uh, and I kept it for years. And it wasn't until the 80s I PX'd it, and I've always regretted having done that. But by then they weren't fashionable, you see.
Yeah. But you said they looked slightly unusual, perhaps in that
Mm.
time. But now they look quite contemporary, don't they, when you see them? They fit in.
Yeah, yeah, I think I think sometimes the raps divide the crowd. Um, if you like Hayman, I think naturally you like the finishes, and there's never been anything quite like it before or since, in my opinion. And there's a holy grail for you. Nobody seems to be able to work out exactly where the wraps were manufactured,
Oh.
and nobody can find a suitable alternative for it. If somebody can actually come up with that,
Mm.
there's a pretty big market in Hayman restoration, I reckon.
Mm.
It's thought that they were probably made in Italy, but um, I don't think anyone really knows.
Well, there's they do look pretty unique. Unfortunately, they suffer an awful lot from fade, don't they? From sun fading and these
Well,
days.
this is this is a bit of an oddity all of itself. Um, you get particular ages of the wrap that don't suffer the aging
Okay.
problem, um, and you get some that very clearly do. And some colours seem to be a lot more affected than others. So, for instance, the later electric blue finish, which didn't turn up until maybe about 74, 73, 74, something like that, um, you never see a faded one of those.
Mm.
Um, but the purple heart finish, which was also a late one. I spoke to a guy who had worked at the factory at Shoeburyness, which was where the original production ended up, and he could remember Purple Heart coming in at that time as a new finish. That one almost invariably fades.
Yeah.
If it sees the light, it turns a completely different color. It goes to a kind of turquoise color. So it's a bit of a mixed bag, and it's pretty obvious to me. And here's another thing about them. So sometimes people will tell you if you strip the Hayman wrap, it comes off in shards. And sometimes that is true.
Oh.
It just flakes away and you can't do a thing with it. There are other examples of it, and I've got pieces of it, in my workshop where it strips off perfectly well. So clearly they sourced it from different places at different times, and maybe it was the same manufacturer and they changed the formulation or what, I don't know.
Interesting.
Maybe they changed the glue and that affected it. I can't answer that one, but there is this variation.
Wow. Well, look, if you don't mind, take us back to the kind of the beginnings of it, where it came from, and because I believe it wasn't Ivor Arbiter something to do with it along the way in some way or other.
Well, very much so. So what you got going on there was that you had Dallas Musical. Now Dallas were a big company that did all sorts of things. They were responsible for at least three ranges of drums. So their flagship kit was Carlton, the semi-pro line was President, and the awful beginner sets were branded Gigster. In fact, my first proper kit was a Gigster, and it was dreadful. It was awful, but I loved it. It was my first kit. It was the 3-drum Gigster, and I loved the thing. It was only later I realised quite what I'd got there. But there it was. So Dallas had a drum making facility, which by the late '60s was based down in Erith in North Kent, just on the river. They also made amplifiers, they made guitars, they did all sorts, and the rest of it. But they were all kind of fading brands. It was a big operation, but it was all getting a bit dated. Somehow they got involved with the young whippersnapper Ivor Arbiter, and Dallas Arbiter was formed. And that would have taken place in early '68, as far as I can make out. And Arbiter gave the whole thing a big kick. It was a subsidiary company of Dallas, but he brought the whole thing, into the modern world. And he went down, it is said, to the factory where Carlton was being made. He just sort of said, we need to stop doing this. These are dance band kits. It's not what the rockers want. We need to make something else. But clearly we've got skills here. We've got ability. Let's make something out of it. So the aim then was to make something that was more like the American kits, because back then it was cripplingly expensive to import an American kit. Really only pros could afford to do it. Because there were very high import duties on overseas gear, and it made it difficult. And the other thing was, you see, that the European manufacturers, but certainly not the British ones, weren't making kits that were like the US kits. So it was things like, if you had a 22 bass drum, it would have 8 lugs and not 10. So you'd got that. The heads would typically be the old white Everplay extras, which I really can't make any case for personally. There may be fans out there, and I apologise if you're a lover of those particular heads, but I can't make a case for them. So that wasn't a great thing. The 13x9 tom was a feature of kits like the Ludwig Super Classic, for example. Did Premier make one? No, they didn't. They stuck with 12x8 or the rather peculiar 14x8. So the stage was set really for something to come along, introduce a modern looking kit with modern sizes, American style features, and that was what Arbiter and his team did. And he had a guy work for him called Jerry Evans, who was, I never met Jerry, and he's no longer with us, but I understand he was a great marketeer. And Jerry seemed to be instrumental in getting together, what the requirements were for this new kit. And one of the things that Jerry contributed to it was he was apparently wandering in Edmonton in North London, and he came across some place that had these sheets of this shiny metallic coloured material, and he thought that looked great on drums. Well, its actually intention was, I find this hard to believe now, but I believe it. I believe this to be true. There were on white goods back in the late 60s things called decor panels, where rather than have a white fridge in your place, you could slide something in. Might be a bit of Formica with a wood grain or something on it. Well, this wrap was being sold for decor panels. So in theory, you could have a midnight blue or a gold ingot or a solid silver fridge if you'd wanted it, apparently. Anyhow, Evans goes in to this place in Edmonton, inquires as to where it comes from. Manufacturer probably gets orders in volumes that they never imagined, and they start putting on the kits. It's like nothing anyone's ever seen before. The other thing that happened was that there was a chap called Dave Golding who was the manager of Drum City, which was one of Arbiter's shops. And the story goes, and I've never managed to catch up with Dave to verify this, by the way, but the story goes that Dave had a Camco kit. Well, you didn't see very much Camco in the UK, and this was looked at, and it was thought, well, this is a good model, for an American style kit. So Camco, as you know, and DW as it eventually came into, had round nut boxes, and then they kind of looked at that, and the guys in the factory down in Erith, the tool makers and like looked at it and said, well, you know what, we could turn those. We haven't got to cast them. We could knock them out very easily. And so they were. And so all the early nut boxes on Hayman were actually cut. They weren't cast, sorry. They were turned from solid metal.
Wow.
And so it gave them the opportunity to get the idea out into the market, see if there was an appetite before they spent a load of money on casting tools.
That's incredible.
Yeah, and in fact, I didn't realise until, in fact, it was after the book was published. I had the chance to have a look at a Camco with the heads off and the rest of it, and I realised just how much Hayman had owed to Camco. White painted interiors, bearing edge very similar, 3-ply kind of drum with re-rings. And yeah, I think you could see the evidence. They looked at a Camco and said, let's make something like that.
Well, but the lug is as close as you can get without getting into trouble, I guess. Is it the turret lug they call it?
Yeah, they do. I mean, I would say this, wouldn't I? But I actually prefer the look of the Hayman lug, to the DW Camco.
Yeah.
One. I just think it's more stylish.
Absolutely. So as far as the wood used, what was used in the shell?
Yeah, anything they could get hold of,
Simple
because
as
so obviously Hayman are known for being loud, and they get that volume partly from being a thin shell. All the examples I've been able to pull apart have been 3-ply, but some have claimed there's 4-ply shells around. But anyway, let's say that they're 3-ply with re-rings. It's that plus the fact that they've got this very heavy interior coating.
Yeah.
So it's actually, and I've stripped them off one by one to find out, it's 5 layers of polyurethane paint.
Oh, okay.
So it's a very heavy coating. They didn't prime them or anything like that. That's why they tend to crack and craze. But the method and presumably a number of applications was developed by a fellow called Jerry Waller, who came to Arbiter's operation from Premier. And Jerry's claim to fame prior to that had been he'd developed the Premier 2000 snare.
Oh wow. Okay.
Yeah, so he'd done some stuff,
Yeah.
and I was told by one of the main contributors to the book. Apparently, he was a brilliant engineer. Unfortunately, he was something I didn't manage to catch up with. Because very sadly, he died just as we were trying to get hold of
Oh.
him and speak with him.
So would he have been
But
responsible for the flow beam throw off then? I wonder on the 2000.
I doubt it very much because flow beam had been
It predated
used
him.
well before that.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
so I quite what Jerry had contributed towards 2000. I can't tell you, but
That's a
I
great
was
drum.
told.
So I'll take my hat off to.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely,
Hmm.
absolutely they are. But yeah, he'd sort of come from having done that, and was involved in the development of Hayman.
Wow.
So
And
you've got this very heavy coating, gives it a certain sound. As to the wood, which was your original question, most of them are made of birch ply, but you come across some that are a sandwich of birch and mahogany, and the mixture can vary as to how much mahogany there is and how much birch. And I've got one out in the workshop that is all mahogany.
oh,
So it was a question of whatever they could get, and it doesn't seem to make the slightest bit of difference to the sound because of the coating.
yeah. And hardware wise,
Mm.
were they were the top were the famous oh what's the mountain hardware to put it on the tom? They're famous for being
Oh well,
for being lethal, aren't they?
the knuckle crusher, as
That's the
people like
one.
to call it.
That's the one.
Yeah, well, here's my take on all of that. Um, it's very obvious when you look at one that that is something again that the tool room at Dallas Arbiter had a look at and sort of said, you know what, we could machine this, we could do that, and we could put together something that was really strong. And they are strong.
Mm.
And you have to judge things in context. If you look at the kind of tom holders that were around in '68 when the brand was launched, they were feeble,
Yeah.
absolutely feeble things. Well, the Hayman one wasn't. Yeah, it's got its faults. Um, it adjusts across. It gives you a limited fore and aft kind of adjustment. Yeah, the capstan nuts are a bit of a pig. The single one I don't think is too bad. I think the real killer is the double one. To be
Yeah.
honest, that is a hard thing to get on with. But the single one I think works perfectly well. I use it on my kits.
Yeah. Better than any consulate rail that you've ever seen, which just sags and
Yes,
just oh yeah.
yes, yeah, hopeless. And if you look at what the competitors had at the time, the sort of things that these bits of pipe, with tiny little thumb screws on, acted directly onto the inside of it. They were hopeless. They used to move. They used to strip.
Yeah.
They weren't fit for rock music. And here was the thing again. You see that Hayman turned up at a time when it was yet to be fashionable to mic kits. Um, Bob will tell you uh, that he can remember playing places where, in effect, every backbeat he had to play with two hands to try and be heard.
Wow.
So, he'd be playing 4/4, and the backbeats would have to be two hands, probably rim shotted, and so on. And that wouldn't last very long because what would usually happen, and I can remember snare stands being like this, the arms would bend down, and eventually the center post of the snare stand would stick itself up and mess up the snare wires, if not go through the snare head. It was diabolical, really. So Hayman was designed for heavy rock playing. See Mr. Kirk.
Yes, indeed. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, we're talking about obviously hardware to mount toms. What was the rest of the hardware like? I mean, you don't see much of it around these days. I don't think, do you really? There's not that much of
Um,
it about.
well, yeah, by modern standards, it's not brilliant.
Mm.
Now, to start with, they didn't have any hardware. The only thing that they had uh, were the drums. They had the spurs. They had sorted out a bass drum mounted cymbal mount. They had the tom holder and rail. That was it. There was nothing else. And it wasn't until um, probably, it's difficult to be precise about this, but I'm pretty sure I'm right in saying this, I think, from the research. It likely wasn't until the end of 1970 that the hardware came along. And that was developed by an outside company down in Dorset. But when it did come, a lot of it was quite good. You know, the snare stand was a pretty sturdy thing. It's got its faults, but it was a Buck Rogers type design, double brace legs, strong. You know, a strong piece of kit. The cymbal stands were higher than what was the custom at the time, so that too, you know, played in well to rock drumming. They weren't particularly great, the cymbal stands, but as I say, compared with what was around in the era, yeah, they weren't too bad. The hi-hat was a reasonable thing, and the bass drum pedal was quite good. I still use one
Oh,
on my
wow.
rehearsal kit.
Right. Oh, okay.
It's not bad. It's not great. You know, my
Does
Pearl
the job.
Eliminator is a much better pedal, but it should be.
Yes, definitely. And you know,
Yeah.
there's one thing that's always fascinated me that I mean, I've never known a great deal about Showman. About Hayman, I should say. I was going to bring on to the next thing, but I've always
Yeah.
seen this, does the Showman and the other names, does that refer to the amount of drums, or there was never any different lines of drums, was there? That, as far as I'm aware, they were
No,
just
it was configurations.
hmm,
So, um, you know, sort of going through them, effectively, you'd got the recording kit,
mhm.
which was actually based on Ludwig Jazzette sizes, if I remember rightly. So you got an 18 by 12 bass, 12 by 8 tom, 14 by 14 floor. That's your recording kit. Next one up's the pacemaker. 20 by 14 bass on that, 13 by 9 and 16 by 16 toms. That too echoes a Ludwig model that I can't quite, might be club date, but I'm not entirely sure.
Downbeat, maybe. I'm
So,
not
so
sure.
it could be, yeah,
Yeah.
somebody will shout me down on this, but it could be that.
Mm.
Then there was the super classic size kit, 22 by 14, 13 by 9 and 16 by 16 toms. That's the big sound. And the Showman is a big sound, but with an added 14 by, no, sorry, an added 12 by 8 tom. That's the fundamentals of it, but they did produce a range of different sizes. So you will see what you would otherwise regard as being a big sound kit in larger sizes than I've described. You'll come across Showman kits in larger sizes than I've
Yeah.
described. So they made bass drums up to 26
Wow.
monsters.
Yeah.
You know, Don Powell of Slade had a 26-inch bass, for example. Rob Townsend, the family, was another well-known 26 bass user. I've never actually heard one. They must have been monsters.
Well, you know, you mentioned an 18-inch bass drum there. Now, that must be an incredibly rare beast these days, because I keep my eye out for secondhand Hayman here and there. I have never seen anything apart from a 22 or a 24, I think, in the secondhand market. Do they exist anymore? Is there any about?
Yeah, they do exist, and they're a bit like buses. It seems to me you don't see them for a long time, and then a few crop up. Well, I've got one in my workshop that is undergoing a long and slow uh, restoration, and I got so frustrated. This was pre-writing the book. I couldn't find a recording kit. I got somebody to make me the shells in the size,
Mhm.
and I bought a basket case, big sound, and stripped it for the parts and built it into my replica
Right.
recording kit.
So
So in fact, I've got two of different kind of provenance.
fantastic. Well, I must keep my eye out, because I never see the Showman seems to be the format that there's most of these days. I could be wrong there, but that's what you see a lot of. That's all I'd
Yeah,
say,
you
in
do,
fact.
and it reflects the fact that as we sort of came into the 70s, that was the fashion for five drum kits,
Hmm.
and a chap that contributed a great deal to the book. A fellow called Eddie Haynes, who'd
Oh,
worked for Dallas Arbiter. Now, Eddie had been the promotion guy. He took over from Jerry Evans. So if I remembered this right, Eddie sort of turned up in early 1970, and was around as the brand came to its zenith. And at one point, he provided me with a handwritten list he'd made, and I believe it was December 71. And it produced this list. It was orders from dealers for the purpose of chasing the factory to find out when they were going to make the damn things, sort of thing. And the majority of those kits were Showman.
Yeah. That makes
So,
sense. Yeah,
it made sense to me too.
I mean, and as far as players went that used them, I don't know whether you can call them endorsers, because would money have changed hands, or would they have had the equipment? Was it a thing then to endorse drums, or?
There was undoubtedly a load of kit put out for promotion purposes. But, no doubt about it.
Yeah.
But Ivor Arbiter was particularly mean and would never give anything away. So if somebody was given a promo kit, Ivor would want whatever they had in PX against it, so it could be sold. So they never got it completely for nothing.
Yeah.
So far as I know.
Interesting.
I mean, that was very much the style. In the book, we have a sort of anecdote how they were trying to get Carl Palmer on board, and Ivor had said something like, "Is he any good?" Not knowing who he was, because it wasn't really, rock wasn't Ivor's genre, so he was assured that Carl's really quite good, and there'd been talk about sort of taking something in PX, and Carl had this enormous stainless steel kit made at the cost of about $5,000, and so clearly that wasn't coming across.
No. Oh gosh. But there was no shortage of names. In that
No.
era, was that there was so many. I mean, Ronnie Verrill, did he play Hayman?
Yes, he did.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, he appears in the main Hayman brochure as an endorser. And for a while, I kind of thought, no, he was just Snap, because there was a bit of a saying with Arbiter that if you stood next to one of his products, you became an endorser, because somebody would take your picture and you'd appear somewhere. But I was sent a picture of Ronnie playing a recording kit in a session with Yehudi Menuhin. So he definitely played them.
Yeah. I mean, obviously Simon Kirke. Simon, thanks for doing this. I really appreciate it.
A pleasure, Matty. Good to see you again.
Yeah, we're talking Hayman Drums, and there are quite a few notable drummers who've used Hayman throughout the 70s, and I think you're at the top of the heap for me. With that beautiful gold ingot kit that you used. Tell me, what was your kind of first introduction to Hayman? Can you remember?
Matty, it was a long time ago, so I'm a bit hazy on how I got interested in them. But someone told me about this new, and back then I think because Free were around from 68 to 73, and I believe around 69/70, I've been using a Ludwig kit. And it was okay. I mean, I'm of that Keith Richards school of musicianship. But you give me any drum, I'll make it sound like me. After a few minutes, so he says, "Give me a guitar and an amp, I make it sound like Keith Richards." So, but I was interested in that around about the time the Creedence Clearwater were around, and I remember, I believe it was Doug Gifford was a drummer. He was telling me about this Camco. This drum company called Camco, and they were out in the east coast of America. And I believe he said in the interview, I don't know if you can get them here in England, but a close second to them is this new company called Hayman. And I went, wow, you know, because I like Doug's playing and I love his drum sound. And obviously Camco went around. And I believe Mr. Constable told me in the book or in the letter that they were part of Dallas Arbiter, or you know.
Yeah, I know exactly what you mean. Yes.
Yeah. And they were built specifically for the English market, but they were based loosely on Camco and, you know, a little higher up the tree, Gretsch. And I've always loved Gretsch. So long story short, I don't remember where I got them. Probably got them from Selma's in Charing Cross Road, because that's where me and Paul Kossoff used to hang out all the time. And I knew the guy in the drum department. So I got this 5-piece kit with 2 rack toms, floor tom, kick and snare, bass drum and snare. And I loved it. I mean, I loved the gold. There was just something about it. And they were kind of light, which pleased my, you know, me, because me and the roadie used to do the, you know, he liked the fact that we didn't have these very, very heavy drums. Sure. But I love the sound of them, Matty. I mean, from the get-go, I really love the sound of them. And Free used them, you know, I used them in Free for a couple of years. And they were in the Royal Albert Hall show, the Lyceum. I mean, the sort of marquee gigs that we did in that era around about All Right Now, when we kind of launched ourselves.
Sure.
And so they were with me for 2 years.
And the Isle of Wight, of course, a really notable one.
Yeah, the Isle of Wight. And I never had any trouble with the bass drum creeping, which was always, because they had these sort of spurs that were not like a straight. They had this little, you know, little bend to them. And for some reason, if you angled them into the wood, the bass drum never crept. And any drummer, as you know, will say, once the bass drum starts creeping, it's all over. So that was another reason that I really liked them. And I was, by the way, a little aside, I was interested to see that Mitch Mitchell had a kit. It's in the Hayman book, because he was a staunch Gretsch / Ludwig player. So, you know, they had a lot of converts and a lot of fans in the upper echelons of drummers. And they weren't really that expensive, obviously, because they weren't imported. I forget what I paid. It's probably about 300 or 400 quid, which is quite a lot, you know, in 1970. But I really, really liked them. And then I made the mistake of taking them down to Paul Rogers' little house in Surrey, and he had a big shed at the top of the garden there, and we put them there, and we would rehearse, and eventually became sort of Bad Company's first rehearsal kits.
Sure.
And then I lost sight of them.
You know, the gold color, it's an iconic color, the gold ingot for the Hayman drums. Was there other options, or was that was what you wanted?
I don't remember. I think, I honestly can't remember, but I know from the get-go I just loved the gold. And then we had someone do Free on the front skin, and it just looked so great, and the lights just boomed off of it. And I used the twin rack toms for a while. It wasn't really my style, because it kind of, the right hand rack tom got in the way of the cymbal, the ride cymbal. So after a while, I ditched that right hand rack tom and just got the got the cymbal a little closer, and I was just left with those 4 drums.
Yeah.
But I just remember the cleanliness of the sound, and it was just a joy to play. And I've been blessed with being able to afford good kits, you know, pretty much all of my career. And DW give me kit Snare for nothing, and Ludwig did. But I just had a soft spot for Hayman, and I wished I'd met the guy. I mean, I'd love to have gone to the factory and just said how much I really liked them. Sure. But you know, then I moved away, and then what happened was I was going through my little workshop where I have the original Bad Company kit and a couple of other Gretsch kits. And I thought, you know what? I'd love to get that Hayman back from England. I would have paid to have it shipped out here.
Sure.
So I got hold of Paul Rogers, and I said, "Hey, Paul, any news on that Hayman kit?" He said, "Oh, got a bit of bad news, Si." I thought, "Oh God, what happened? Did it burn down? Did the barn burn down or something?" He said, "No, but I moved away from England, and it's in a real sorry state." So I said, "Oh, it's okay. I mean, I'll have it refurbished." And so he got his son, Stephen Rogers, who was living in the house at the time, to send me photos of the kit. And it was like it had been on the Titanic, Matty. It was completely corroded, and it was just beyond salvageable. And then I believe I spoke to you a few years ago, and you mentioned Yard.
I did.
And bless him. But that was not the kit. I mean, it was for a moment. Now, here's the weirdest thing, whether or not you want to put this in the broadcast or not, I don't mind. So that very day, once I got these photos and thought, oh, shit, it's beyond, I can't do anything with this. That's it. And I'm looking through Modern Drummer, just, because I like looking through drum magazines because I'm a drummer. That's how it is. And blow me down in the miscellaneous for sale section in the back. Hayman kit, gold, for sale. I thought, you've got to be kidding me. This is like a miracle. But the only trouble was it was in Sweden.
Right.
So I sent him an email. I said, look, I'm really interested. And it was the exact same specification, exact same color and everything. And it was almost as if, by God's hand, that I said goodbye to my original kit, and blow me down, there's an avatar of the same kit. And I got it, I had it shipped over from Stockholm, and it's in my basement now. And it's, but it's not the one. But there you go.
Have you played it?
I haven't. I believe I started setting it up, but some of the hardware was not around, and
right.
where Hayman fell down, it was not in the drum department because the drums are great, but the hardware was a bit dinky.
Yes,
the hi-hat was very frail and wobbled a lot, and the cymbals were more like music stands with filters on the top. They weren't really. It wasn't like the DW or the Gibraltar gear that you get now, but the drums were just gorgeous. I mean, I should set it up and play it,
Sure. And you mentioned something before about going to buy the kit, and it could have been 300 or 400 quid. Was the endorsement thing a thing back then, or if you wanted something, you just go and buy it regardless of who you are and who you played for? Was that ever a thing?
Good question. I was never endorsed by anyone other than DW, and they never, they gave me kits when Bad Company was really hot and heavy.
Yeah,
and then when we sort of stopped touring, I got kits, but I had to pay, trade prices, which is still half of what you would pay normally. But Hayman and Ludwig, no, I paid through the nose. I only got an endorsement from Ludwig when Bad Company joined Swan Song, and Bonzo took me under his muscular wing and said, you got to get rid of those shitty drums. I forget what they were. You need my, and he got me this 26-inch by 15 bass drum. I said, fuck me, Bonzo, I've seen smaller apartments than your bloody bass drum. So they gave that to me for nothing. But I think endorsements back in those days, Matty, unless you were really, really big, they were few and far between, if ever.
Yeah. Different story these days, that's for sure, isn't it?
Yeah. I'm interested in Simon Phillips. I guess he must have played them at one time, because he said he's been a Tama guy for years.
Yeah, yeah. Early days, he was definitely a Hayman guy.
Wow.
There's lots of pictures of it out there. So there you go.
Yeah, great
Members of
drummer.
an elite club. Look, Simon, thanks so much for taking the time to do this. We really appreciate it. And
Always a pleasure, Matt. Always a pleasure. We'll do it again. Anything you want to know, just give me a holler and I'll come down the pipe.
Yeah, you know, the list of people using them was pretty phenomenal. Now, I know early in his career that Simon Phillips had used Hayman drums, quite a sizable kit, as you can imagine. So let's hear from Simon about his time using Hayman. We're talking about Hayman drums today. Now, I know back in the early days of your drumming career, you used Hayman for a little while. So just tell us about your relationship with Hayman.
So the drum kit I was using when I basically turned professional, which was in 1969 at the grand old age of 12, because I joined my dad's band. I was using a secondhand Premier kit. It was a Black Pearl, but it was also I don't know what the date was. It was obviously sometime in the 60s, but the problem with it was the 12-inch tom-tom and the 16-inch tom-tom were what they call pre-international size.
Oh, yes.
And I didn't know anything about that. All I knew was I wanted to use Remo head. So off I go down to the, taken down because I couldn't, unless I got on the tube and the bus or something, then I couldn't carry anything back. Persuade my mom or my dad to drive me to Greenwood's, Jack Greenwood. I think that was the name of the store.
Okay.
I don't remember where it was, but that was the drum shop I used to go to that was near where I used to live, which was in Bushy Heath in Hertfordshire, very near Watford.
Yeah.
And that's where I would, buy all my little bits and pieces. I bought lockfast stands for the Premier kit and changed the tom-tom holder, put a cymbal holder on the bass drum, Buddy Rich style.
Yes, of course.
And then I thought, right, time to go to Remo heads because I know they're going to sound better. I think I'd already tried one on the snare drum, which was it was a Black Pearl Premier snare drum. And there I proudly walk in with my 16 and my 12-inch drum head, right? And I go, right, and I take the top off. Wow, again, I go, huh? What? And the 12-inch was larger. So I managed to get the hoop on kind of on the wrong place, but I managed to do it and it kind of worked. But the 16 was small, the 16 shell was larger than the 16-inch head. And I went, oh no. And anyway, it was starting to, it was okay. It was a great starter kit for live, but then I was starting to do my dad's recording sessions as well. And I was complaining and moaning, I need a real drum kit, basically. Not that it's not a real drum kit, but just a better drum kit. I was a huge Ludwig fan. I had bought a secondhand Superphonic 5-inch, which I still have, off Exchange of Mart. Wasn't the greatest sounding one. They were very changeable, those drums, actually. Some were great, some weren't. But it was a step up from my wood shell Premier because it was a metal shell. That was probably the biggest advantage, Plus it felt great and and I was trying to get a Ludwig drum kit, but they were so expensive back then. I mean, we just couldn't afford, most people couldn't afford to buy American drum kits back then, So my dad knew Ivor Arbiter because it was a Dallas Arbiter. Is it John Dallas? Did I get that right?
Yes, I think you did. Yeah, you did.
It says John Dallas Arbiter. Yeah. They used to be in Perivale, near Ealing. And so he called Ivor and spoke to him and, to try to get a bit of an endorsement or something, And Ivor agreed to supply a Hayman kit because I'd been looking at all the things and I didn't want Premier. I wanted Ludwig, but Hayman at that time seemed to be coming up and I saw all these drummers using Hayman. I had the Hayman catalog and everything. And I thought, wow, these look like good. And the biggest thing is that they're international sizes. And it's a 13-inch rack tom. And I could also get a 14 and a 16. So that's the setup I really wanted, which was really at that time was like the Peter Erskine setup when he played with Stan Kenton.
Yes.
And he was using Slingerland. And so he either agreed to kind of do it at cost. So off we went down, you know. But the one thing I didn't like about Hayman was the hardware.
Yes.
So I ordered it with Rogers hardware for some ridiculous reason. So because they were distributing Ludwig, Rogers, and Hayman, Heisty, and all the Fender stuff, Fender CBS. That was the new deal that they were doing. So Rhodes and Fender guitars and stuff like that. So I thought, yeah, the Rogers stuff looks good because it's still kind of small stands and, you know. Now, what I don't remember is whether I used the Hayman tom-tom holder, but I didn't like it. I didn't like the look of it. And then playing with it was like, oh, it seems overkill. It was very heavy and
dangerous.
So yeah. I remember I was carrying, you know, having to pack it up and carried it around myself. And I was like 13, 14 years old. You know, that's a lot of weight to carry around. And so I don't remember what the first tom-tom holder was. It might have been a Rogers Swivomatic, but I would have had to re-drill both the bass drum and the toms, which I did. I mean, but I don't think I did it. I think I went to a Premier tom holder. I think that's what it was. The new type with it wasn't a round tube, it was kind of an oval tube.
The oval, yes, yeah.
Right. And that seemed to be a little bit more, from an engineering point of view, a little bit more sophisticated, a little bit more modern, you know. And I remember the Swivomatic bass drum pedal. I went, oh God, this is awful. I can't deal with this. So I went back to my Speed King, which I'd been using for years. And I had an Atlas cymbal stand, Atlas hi-hat stand. I went back to that and they were kind that they let me return those, you know. So I had a nice thing going without Arbiter. And I got to know a couple of people down there. One was a guy called John Hill. Don't know if you know him, ever came across him. He worked for Peisty, worked for Arbiter for a long time. I don't remember the other guy. Don't remember what his name was. They were really kind, and I used to go down there, and they were really sweet. They said, yeah, you know, they helped me really, you know, at that age, you know. I mean, I'm earning with my dad, but you know, still, as you know, living in London in those days, it was tough, you know.
Yeah.
So, but the drum kit was Midnight Blue. 22-inch bass drum. I was using a 20 before. That was fantastic. Remo heads, front to hand, back. And the 13.9, 14.14, and a 16.16. And the musical possibilities with those three toms to me was just staggering. I loved it. And that was the start of me and my love affair with tom-toms. Because the different tonality. And my dad, the last broadcast we ever did, there was a phrase in one particular song, which I used all three toms. And I guess he'd never really heard a drum kit like that before. And he went, yeah. And he didn't give me much, he wasn't generous with his compliments. Let's put it like that. And he did. And that was like, yes. And so the concept of using your tom-toms in a musical way, which goes with the music, if the chord is changing, you know, they don't actually have to be pitched to any particular pitch, but it's just the general tone, which gives the support to the arrangement. And that to me was key in a lot of the development of my playing, from the musicality of it. I just love that. To me, that made so much sense to me, you know. So I do remember the Hayman transfer on the front head of the bass drum started coming off. I do remember that. And that was because it was like Amen. The agent disappeared. Ama. And then Ma, you know. That was funny. I can't remember what my solution was. Maybe I got a new front head. I can't, because in those days they used to put a transfer, which you put on a frosted head. It just didn't work.
No.
That was before they used to emboss Then they started embossing heads and stuff. I can't remember whether Hayman did that or not, but they probably did. They probably did that. But the kit was finally, I had a grown-up sound.
Yeah.
And that was lovely. And then when I joined Jesus Christ Superstar in 73, September 73, I used that Hayman kit. And I was taking it out of there occasionally to do sessions, which I started doing. 16 then. It was, I mean, it was ridiculous because it was very hard to get the kit up onto this tall riser on the stage of Superstar. And get it, you know, park the car outside double yellow lines, take all the cases in, get the concierge or you know, everywhere had a concierge in those days, you know, and look after that and back out and hope nobody nicked the cymbals, you know, and all that kind of stuff. I knew it was time to get a second drum kit for doing sessions. So I called Arbiters up again. I said, yeah, I'd love to get another drum kit. And this was a 4-piece Hayman gold.
Yes.
It was a few years after the Midnight Blue one. So I think I got that in, I'm going to say 72. That sounds about right. And this I'm getting in a year later, maybe 73, 74 probably, beginning of 74. I don't know. It just didn't sound right.
Oh.
Didn't sound the same. I don't know what had changed, but it didn't sound right. And I just went and I spoke with my mom about it. And she was always very good at, you know, she was the driver behind my becoming a musician, not my father.
Wow.
He did not want to have me anything to do with the music business, mainly because, you know, he knew what it was like. He'd been in it since the 20s. So he knew the reality of it. And I think he just wanted what he thought was a better life, but ain't going to happen. I'm already playing professionally, you know. So she was a very good guiding light. She said, I think she said, pay the extra money, get the kit you want. And so I marched down. Was I driving? I can't even remember. I might have been by then, yeah. And went down with the Hayman kit and said, look, I'm sorry, it's, you know, it's just not working, but that Ludwig kit will. And that's when I got my first Ludwig kit, which was a black leatherette finish. It was a big beat outfit. It had the 12 and the 13, but I said, I don't want the 12 because in those days I was still using my right here, you know. So 22, 13, 16, I already had the snare drum, so it wasn't a problem. So I used the wooden Hayman snare drum in the show, and I used my Ludwig 400 for sessions. So that was basically that's what happened with that kit. But the blue kit was sounding great. And then same year, I wanted to try double bass drum. So I went and down to Hayman and I got another 22 and I got a 12-inch.
Right.
And I must have fitted the Premier holder to the top, to the, you know, left bass drum and the 12. That was the kit that I mean, I played that kit on all sorts of sessions, which, you know, doing double bass drum stuff, which I didn't know what to do with it, but I just loved it, you know. And I had an extra tom-tom, 2 on the top, 2 on the bottom here. It was the kit, for some reason, the kick drum and that tom-tom, it was fine. I don't know kind of really what happened. I mean, but I used that kit on a few albums. And live, of course. And then I left Superstar, and that was my live kit. And then that turned into the Hayman Monster, which Eddie Ryan, is that his name?
Yes. Yes, indeed.
I bought some extra shells, disused kind of cast aside shells at Arbiter. I said, what have you got? What have you got? You know, I said, well, we got this one. And they were all different colors. I said, don't worry, I'm getting the whole kit recovered anyway. So that Hayman turned into 224s. I can't remember if it was 12, 13, 14, 15 or 2 12s, 13, 14. It might have been that. And then 3 toms, 3 floor toms of weird sizes. had it all refinished in this kind of lovely dark bronze, and used that for a little bit with a band that I was in called Chopin with Ray Russell and Ann O'Dell. And that was in 75. And then we were managed by a guy called Don Arden.
Yes.
And signed to Jet Records. So as you can imagine, we weren't getting paid because he didn't like paying people. And we had an album release, and we were doing loads of gigs around England. We were supporting ELO. And I think we were on our way in the minibus up the M1, and Stuart, the driver, pulls over and says, "Right, anybody got any cash for some gas?" And we're having a whip round. I said, "Didn't you get a float?" "No, Don didn't give us one." And anyway, that was the demise of the band.
Yeah.
And also the demise of kind of playing that drum kit, because there was no reason to play it, really. And then I kind of fell into doing session work, and which I used the Ludwig for. And then same thing. As the more sessions I was doing, I needed 2 drum kits, because I had to do 10-to-1 at CTS in Wembley, then drive into Whitfield Street 2-to-5 at CBS, and then maybe Ramport 7 till whenever. It was kind of getting like that. So I had to get a separate kit, I think I used to cart my cymbals around, something like that, and that was it. And I really never used the Hayman again.
Wow. And
for a couple of things. I think I did a very short tour with Chris Farlow.
Okay.
And I used half of the big Hayman kit for that, because it was live, and it was a great live kit. It really was. And then I was doing sessions. I hardly ever played live for the next, couple of years.
Yeah.
So I was using the Ludwigs, and then I think I put the Hayman kit up for sale in Percussion Services.
Yeah.
In King's Cross, if I remember correctly.
Wow.
Something like that. Yeah, I think so. And that was it. That was my relationship with Hayman, really. But at the time when it was necessary, it was fantastic, and they were lovely drums. Yeah. Lovely drums.
Fantastic. Thanks, Simon. Honestly, I really appreciate it, and hopefully
my pleasure.
Speak to you very soon. Take care.
Okay, lovely. Thanks.
Cheers, Simon.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye now. Bye-bye. Bye-bye. Now, let's talk snare drums, because obviously there was the vibrasonic snare, which there's still many of them around and about. Great sounding drums, but they did I know they produced the Metasonic. Was there any others, Nigel, that they did?
No, it was the wooden snare, which has almost always been seen in 5.5-inch depth. Although I did come across one, which was 4-inch deep, and it looked to me like it had been made in the factory, and I had the impression it might have been one of the ones that was made as production was running down. But that 14 by 5.5 wooden snare is the typical Hayman snare, and I think they're great drums. I really do. It's a drum to crank up very, very tight, and I think they're great, and clearly a lot of people do. And the only other variation was indeed the Metasonic, which again was, as far as I know, developed by the aforementioned Jerry Waller.
Yeah,
and it's a fine drum because it's an aluminium snare, or some form of alloy. Anyway, we know not quite what it was, but it's one piece. It's a spun shell. There's no weld, there's no join or anything like that in it. And they are great drums, and they got the chroming pretty right. Compared with a lot of aluminium chrome snares, they don't seem to suffer from flaking to quite the same degree as some others that you see. So good job was done with them, and those are pretty rare. Indeed. I had one, and I wish I still had it.
Yeah, we
That's all I'm saying.
we won't talk about that. I'm involved in that, sadly, as well. But we'll I don't want to
It's
upset.
not your fault.
No, no. But I think they're incredible sounding drums. Definitely on a par with the Ludwig 400. I in my view, and there's a particular fan of the drums in a Canadian heavy metal band called Anvil, Robb Reiner, and he actually has two. And well, I found them both in the end, and he'd have probably had three had the one that you sent me come through and not been lost in wherever it may be, somewhere or other. Oh, it's upsetting.
Wherever it may be.
So yeah, I know Robbo has a particular love of these drums, and the first one he had has been toured. Well, literally, he's been on a world tour with it. So let's cut to Robb Reiner from Anvil, get his thoughts on the Metasonic.
Matty, thanks for asking me. Always a pleasure.
Well, hey, likewise. It's been a little while since I saw you. I think it was last October when I caught up with you last. And as usual, we end up talking about drums and snare drums. And as the eagle-eyed viewer can see behind you, there's quite a selection of snare drums, a lot of chrome. So tell us briefly about the collection behind you, Rob, because you're into a certain kind of thing, aren't you?
Yeah, I think I'm the metal guy.
Yeah, the metal guy.
Yeah, like I'm the metal guy. Well, for me, metal snare drums have always been my thing. I've always loved the sound of them, the look of them, the feel, the response, whatever these drums produce. I've just been the ring, the overtones, anything else I've forgotten that they do. I mean, like, I just love them. I'm an old school guy, and I'm going to continue playing them.
Yeah, and
that's kind of where
you're not into the modern stuff so much. This is you kind of have like 60s to early 80s.
As you know, I'm kind of like a vintage guy. I love the 60s, 70s era timelines. That's where I'm kind of dabbling a little more with the 80s just to add things to the collection.
Sure.
But yeah, I'm a vintage. I love it. I appreciate the 50s and the earlier stuff too, but I'm primarily I don't know. So something I have a passion for the 60s and the 70s.
Yeah. Well, I know you've got some of the usuals in there, the Ludwigs, the Rogers, etc. But obviously, we're talking about something in particular today, and that's Hayman. Now, I know for a fact that you have and love two Metasonics, not one, but two. That probably, I don't know, it's probably hardly any in Canada anyway, but I think you've probably got them.
I'm gonna go out on a line, and maybe somebody will come in on us and dispute it. But I'll say I'm the only one in Canada that has not one but two Hayman Metasonics.
Yeah, and not
they're incredible snare drum. I love them.
Yeah, well, not only do you have it as part of the collection, you've recorded with it. You've done a world tour with it, so it's not an ornament, is it?
No, absolutely. Yes, I recorded the latest record by Anvil that's coming out June 28th. And the drum sounds absolutely over the top fantastic.
Yeah.
Brilliant, as you English would say. It's fucking brilliant.
Well, I heard you in Chester, I think it was October, and you were using the Metasonic, and it did sound $1 million. It really did. Doesn't sound like an old drum. If you can sound like an old drum, it sounded current, fitted in with the rest of the drums. Tell me, what was it? I mean, do you remember the Metasonics from back in the day when they came out? Was it a thing you recall from then?
Yeah, I do. The story on that is simple for me. To this day, I'm a big Uriah Heep fan, but I'm also a big Lee Kerslake fan.
Yeah.
Okay. Anyhow, so when I was a kid, I saw pictures of his. I think it was a Slingerland drum kit in a day, but he had Hayman snare drums. He had the wood copper, whatever the copper look, or whatever that, and he had a Metasonics.
Yeah.
And I saw these in different pictures, right? And I always said to myself, I got to get one of those fucking things. And that was when I was a kid. Now, why? Because I think the sound on those records, for all I know, maybe wasn't a Meta. Who knows, right?
Yeah.
But as a kid, you don't know. So in my mind, I was just going, that's the sound. Yeah, you know what I mean? But so that's how far back goes for me, the Hayman thing.
So you've
Lee Kerslake was my inspiration.
yeah. So you've waited a long time for this, then, haven't you? You know.
Yeah, a real long time because I never met someone like you.
Well, yeah. In case you're wondering what's going on, we kind of help each other out, and I source you some snares that are maybe harder to come by over in Canada. So yeah, we've been lucky. We
Yeah,
found.
yeah. Be humble about it, Matty. That's nice. I like it.
Well, it's true, isn't it? You know, you've got to help a friend out. So yeah, I was
Yeah.
lucky enough to find through some friends over here, and yeah, and I'm glad they've gone to a good home. I mean, in your view, how good are they comparable to, you know, we'll talk Ludwig, we'll talk whatever, Gretsch. Do they compete?
Yeah, my humble opinion, it's in the top 5 of all time
Hmm.
of all this metal.
Yeah, that's quite a compliment.
In my you know, my humble opinion. I mean, whatever. It's in there. Yeah, it's in on that. It's where is it in the top 5? It's maybe 3, 2.
Yeah. I mean, that's a lot of snare drums, and you know that's a massive compliment to a drum, which, let's be honest, is pretty
You know
scary.
what? It's underrated. You know, Matty, you know that. It's
Mhm.
underrated. Most drummers don't even know what it is.
Yeah,
As a
exactly.
matter of fact, I was at a drum shop earlier today talking about this upcoming little chat and all that.
Mhm.
And I was talking about Hayman, and Buddy, he didn't even never heard of Hayman Drums.
Wow.
And
Well,
he's a drum fucking guy.
well, when this episode comes out very shortly, you'll have to point him in the direction of it, and so you'll find out everything you need to know.
Yeah, right. Perfect.
But I know that especially the second drum that I found for you, which is the more recent one. Obviously, I took it on a couple of gigs before sending it out, and I was knocked out. Sound engineers were really impressed. Easy to EQ, just
Yeah.
sounds current. Sounds great.
It's an absolutely underrated piece of art.
Hmm.
In my opinion. You know, like I know people think I'm out there, but you know, with these snare drums, I know this that's it's like a Ludwig 400, maybe, you know, but it's harder to say which is. I don't know that Hayman is as good. It's not like it's not as good. You know what I mean?
Yeah, sure. No, I'm with you. Well, it's
And it has its own character. It has a unique character. I just fell in love with it, and I was toured with it. It sounded great live, and I'll probably use it again in the future. Who knows?
yeah, yeah. And the fact that it's there forever now on the new album, obviously, which isn't out yet, is incredible.
But when you hear it yourself or whoever, you know, that's the Metasonic snare on all the tracks.
Yeah.
There's no real sample. There's no sample. It's just a real drum. We don't use samples and shit, right?
Do you know what? I've just had a thought. It's quite a nice thought that the last 2 snare drums that you've recorded, the last 2 albums with Anvil, I've supplied you with both of them.
You're absolutely right.
That's quite cool, isn't it?
It's beyond cool. You don't understand how cool it is, but it's very cool because same with the Beverly.
Yeah.
I know we're not talking about that, but that was another drum that was a must-have.
See, British drums. What can I say?
Hey, well, I'm back in the day. I mean, Premier made good snare drums too.
Yeah, definitely. I can see
you
a few of those in there as well.
Yeah, I've got a few.
Yeah. Well, look, I know. I was going to say, I know you've got a new album coming out is it June?
Yeah, June 28th.
June 28th. So we'll keep eyes peeled for that. And then I know you'll be touring after that, obviously, to promote the album. So
I can tell. I mean, this Friday, April 5th, they're going to put out the song that I played for you last year. And they're going to put the album cover. Then everybody can release the title and all that. That's all the record company BS is coming up. You know what I mean?
Of course. Well, look, we'll look forward to it, and I really appreciate you sparing the time to talk about the fantastic Metasonic. And
no, anytime. And more drummers should know about the Metasonic. More drums? Should you actually use them?
Yeah.
And so on and so forth. They just don't know. So when you don't know, you don't know, right?
And that's if they can find one, because you've got most of them now, and you know.
Well, I don't know. I've got two of them. I got
Two
two,
of
and the reason I have two because I would have wanted to have gotta have a backup in this world.
Yeah, they're great drums, and you know, it's nice to know that they're being used.
Whatever happened to the Nigel shipment?
Well, who knows? We did talk about that, and
Oh yeah,
I don't think Nigel
Nigel
doesn't like talking about the one that went away. So we'll just say got lost somewhere. So hopefully,
oh my God, you know, fuck, that's a story in itself, isn't it?
Yeah. So would you buy a third if it came up again? Surely not. So tell me, obviously we've had a good chat about the drums. You know, we've had some of the incredible history, the endorsers. How did it? Obviously, it's no longer. Well, there's a version of it around which isn't quite the same. But how did the original Hayman thing come to a close, Nigel?
Well, there is some mystery about it. So really, the original range only had a life of about 7 years. As we've already covered, you know, the drums were introduced. They eventually got them into the market around about late 68. You saw Zenith, you know, around about 71, 72. The drums were still being produced in Erith at that time. By early 74, Dallas Arbiter had sent up a humongous factory in Shoeburyness, where they made not only Hayman, but they made Vox amps and they made guitars, and all sorts were going on in Shoeburyness, but it only lasted for a couple of years. So, you know, the business was either wound up or it became insolvent. It's reasonably unclear exactly how it came to an end, but for whatever reason, Dallas Arbiter and that manufacturing operation was wound up, and with it went Hayman. But it's probably fair to say that it was already on the slide, you know, as a brand at that point, because it didn't receive any further investment. There was no more development in Hayman. Once they'd got the stands together, once they'd got the Metasonic snare, bar the fact that there were a couple of new finishes introduced along the way, nothing actually happened to it. And the market have reacted. So I don't want to pick on Premier here because I like Premier gear as well. Yes. I've got 2 Premier kits if anyone thinks that I'm being biased here. But certainly at the time Hayman appeared, it was a big shock, I think, to the market leader. But they reacted very strongly. And by 72, 73, they'd revised their range, they'd reacted to all the things that they needed to react to. And really, they kind of, you know, blew Hayman out of the water at that point. Now, had there been some reaction from either Arbiter and his men, who knows, you know, it could have been a different story, but there wasn't. And so by the time you got into 74, 75, yeah, the brand was kind of in decline, you know, to a certain degree, and it was being slightly left behind, you know, by the newer features that others were introducing. For instance, you know, I mean, we talked about the tom holder. Had they thought to introduce a double holder that was more like Ludwig's or the Premier Lockfast at the time, which you could have done quite easily. You could have taken the spur blocks and put those on the drums to provide a better mounting for you know, that kind of holder. If they'd done things like that, they could probably have kept it alive, come up with some new finishes, new ideas, but they didn't.
Yeah.
So there was it, and it all came to a, you know, rather kind of sad end, and the remaining parts, and indeed, as I understand it, some of the shells and tooling was sold to Lou Dias of Supreme Drums in North London.
Right.
And that was that, really.
I mean, it's quite surprising, really, knowing Ivor Arbiter's dislike of Premier, which it's quite well documented.
It's very well documented, yes.
Yeah, you'd think he'd have maybe upped the game a little bit just to give him a run for their money a little more, but I guess, you know, things things run their course. That's the way it is sometimes, isn't it?
Well, I mean, there were other aspects to this. You see, Arbiter left the Dallas setup. I think at some point in '73, and all the evidence is that there was some kind of falling out. Later on, he seemed to get control back again, and exactly when and how that happened, I could never get to the bottom of. But by the time Premier were reacting, Ivor wasn't looking at that particular goal anymore, and it probably moved on, to something else. I mean, Ivor was always thinking about new things, and of course, I mean, the other thing. Let's not forget this. He was also working on his alternative tuning methods,
Yes.
which first saw the light of day in Arbiter Auto Tune. Yeah. And so I guess you could make an argument that says by then he only saw Auto Tune as being the answer. Hayman, that's it. That's in the past. Yeah. What people want is Auto Tune. Trouble is, they didn't want Auto Tune.
No,
very few people wanted Auto Tune for a whole range of reasons that we won't go into here.
Yeah, definitely. Well, look, Nigel, this has been really, really interesting. And for those that have the book already, and I know there'll probably be many people watching this who've got the book, this is an added bonus. To the people who haven't got it yet, keep your eyes peeled for the digital version, because I'm sure there's a whole bunch more information in there that we haven't talked about today. So, yeah, so there's no official launch date yet, is it? I guess it's...
No, I've got to do a bit more work first, but some point this year, eventually, I'll get it together.
Oh well, so keep your eyes peeled, everybody. It is going to happen, which is great news. Nigel, thanks so much. I really appreciate it.
Not at all. Thank you, Matt. It's been an absolute blast. Thank you.